Okay, we're doing another Age of Mythology Retold tier list. Today we're going through the god powers. I've split them up by age from Archaic Age to Mythic Age. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the Archaic Age, then we're going to bring them out, do the Classical Age, and then right at the end we're going to put them all together. The reasoning for this is I did my Myth Unit tier list, and maybe it was a little bit controversial that I weighted them quite highly, but I found it quite difficult to put them in the same tier list with the Mythic Age and the Classical Age units and kind of actually compare them. So this is the way round that we're going to do it this time. So we're going to start off with Archaic Age ones. And what we're looking for is, first off, is it a good single-use god power? And if it isn't, then what is the cooldown rate and what is the cost to reuse this? I've got a sheet from the Age of Mythology Reddit, which I'll post as a link in the description. And it basically just has the costs and everything. It might be slightly out of date, but some of them have changed, which I do know, something like Chaos, but we'll go through that when we get to it. So the first one is Archaic Age. We're going with Hades Sentinels. So Sentinels are the 5 archers that Hades gets. It's a very defensive god power. It actually costs 50 to reuse, which isn't even that bad. So if you want to give it to a second town center or your allies, it isn't the worst thing. Obviously, it probably isn't strong enough to be 50, but I'm going to put this as A tier. I just think it's a really solid. There isn't a problem with it. Like, it definitely isn't broken, but it's just a very strong defensive god power, which suits Hades' playstyle really well. So it's definitely A tier. Now, what we're going to do here is Lore and Great Hunt. I feel are very similar, but one's better than the other, and I'll try and explain that. So lore, I think, is also A tier. So the reason lore is better than Great Hunt, in my opinion, is lore makes it so Poseidon doesn't need to spend 50 resources on a granary, which might not sound like a lot, but it means that he can do some really early build orders that get him up to the classical age at crazy fast advanced times. And you can put on a lot of pressure with centaurs. How lore works and also how Great Hunt works is as you go up the ages, you get more food. So lore brings in food and also spawns some chickens. You get more chickens depending on which age you're in. Great Hunt starts with a low amount of food that you can actually get in the Archaic Age, and then as you go up, it obviously gives you more. But I just feel like lore is so much better; it gives a lot more value. So it's definitely just a one up from Great Hunt. There's nothing wrong with Great Hunt, but both of them they give you more secure food within your base. But Retold gives you a lot more berries and chickens than Legacy anyway. So maybe they're not as busted as maybe they once were. Next, we're going with Bolt. Now, in some matchups, Bolt is straight up S tier. Like if you are playing against Set and you can bolt his priest, so it means that he can't convert any animals until he builds a temple. Or some early myth unit raids, like if you're playing against Thor or Odin or Fray and they have their early Valkyries, then you can just bolt that. You get massive value from it. Um, but in some matchups, it doesn't really do much, and I feel that the longer you hold it, the weaker it is. It's just so much better to use early on. You can obviously use it in the Greek matchup against early heroes. Um, so I mean, maybe I've kind of convinced myself it's A. I was going to put it B tier, but I think it is just no. We're going to go for B tier. I also should have mentioned that Bolt actually costs 65 to redo, which maybe is a reason to put it in B tier. Like it's quite shocking that this costs more to do than something like Shockwave, which Shockwave you'll get massive value for, and this is why we're going to cover that one in a minute. So the next one up is Prosperity. Prosperity is Isis's way to get extra gold. So this can be used going up to the heroic age to get a double Migdor stronghold. It can be used to get loads of priests out. You can use it if you want to go up to the classical age and drop down a fast town center. If you want to advance really early, you don't really need it for that. Or when you get to the late game, you can just use it again. It costs 60 favor, which probably isn't the best use of it. But if you have like loads of villagers on gold, if you have like 40, then I mean you're going to get loads of gold income. So I'm going to put that as A tier. I think that's a solid god power. So one that maybe feels quite similar, but isn't as good would be Rain. So Rain is weaker on its own, but it is a lot cheaper to redo. So um, it's 30 favor to reuse Rain. So I feel like if you're not doing at least 2 rains, you're probably not using it properly. It's got such a short cooldown now. It used to be like a minute, and now it's very short. Um, I think maybe just Rain need a buff, or maybe if you made it even cheaper than 30, then it might be slightly better. But I feel like this is one of the things which maybe brings Ra down a little bit now. I imagine in like the big team games and stuff, lots of Ras is still going to be very strong. But yeah, not the best. Now I'd say another C tier. I mean, this is a situational one. There's two eyes here. This first eye is Set's vision. So I'm going to put it C tier. I think for Set it does work really well, and you can use it to use your shifting sands, or you can use it to drop a meteor or tornado, or just see what your opponent's up to. And I think with the tech clairvoyance, where it's basically free, I think then it is so much better. But if you weren't to do that, it will cost 40 to reuse, which is pretty crazy. But with the tech, I would say it probably bumps up to a B tier. But we're judging it with it. We should probably judge it without the tech, so we're going to put it as C tier. Next, we're going to go for Spy, and I would say that Spy is slightly better than Set's Vision. So if you want to, this is the Loki God power, where if you run into your enemy base, you can use it on any of your enemy units, and then you'll be able to see the line of sight of that unit. Um, it's definitely better now that your opponent can't see when you've used it. When the game was first out, you could see that the enemy had actually used the spy, and you would be able to easily know what's been spied. But now it works as in as intended, and I'd say it's just a B tier. It can be very strong. To reuse it, it's 60, which I think is pretty crazy. I mean, it obviously shows how strong it is on a 30-second cooldown, but I mean, it doesn't really matter what the cooldown is if it costs 60 to reuse. Now we're going with Dwarven Mine next, and Dwarven Mine, before Retold came out, this was one of the ones that I was really worried about, because if it was the same strength that it was in Legacy, then it would be extremely busted for Retold, if it could just be on some sort of cooldown. But it costs 60 favor to reuse, and in the Archaic Age, you get an abysmal amount of gold. And basically, the later on you use it, the way more gold you get. But if you use it in the Archaic Age or the Classical Age, you barely get any. So I'd say that's a B tier. Um, if it gave you more gold, then it would just bump up straight away to higher tiers. But how it is now, B tier. Next is Chronos Deconstruct. This takes down an enemy building. It actually takes quite a while to do, but it gives your opponent the resources back. So if you were to use it on a Migdal stronghold, you'd be giving your opponent 400 gold and 10 favor back. So there is a bit of a drawback there. But if you use it in the right circumstances, like you can use it to take down a mana from Atlanteans, or if your opponent only has one Migdal stronghold or one fortress with all the villagers gathering gold next to it, then you can use it and basically kill off all the villagers because they'll have to run out of it. A lot of players will play around this by putting two castle type buildings up, which is obviously the way to play around it. So for that case, we're just going to put it B tier, and that's fine. So next up is Aranos's god power, and that is Shockwave, and that is going straight in S tier. I've heard a lot of people say Shockwave is weak, and I think they're just used to old Shockwave that was absolutely busted. So why Shockwave is slightly different now is it still does a big shockwave on enemy units, spreads them out in AoE, but you can't shoot them until they've fallen down. Whereas in the old game, you could get your Terma and shoot everything that was in the air. And now that doesn't work like that. It's obviously insanely strong. It costs 15 to reuse, plus 15 each time. So the second one is basically going to be free. It costs 15, but that's going to be nothing for Atlanteans. Especially Aranos gets extra favor anyway because his oracles have more line of sight. It's basically just a better bolt that has a shorter cooldown. It might even be the best one here on its own. I mean, maybe not better than something like Prosperity on its own, but and then lastly, we have Gaia's Forest. There's nothing wrong with Gaia's Forest. It's just not the strongest power, so I'm just going to put it D tier. For her, I mean, you can use it very defensively, to essentially make a wall that you can then chop down. The wood that you get from Gaia's Forest, you gather faster, so that's obviously the strength of it. But I wouldn't say it's the strongest power overall, so I'm just going to put it D tier. But the first two are free, so that is one good thing about it. Okay, now we're up to the classical age. So we've reset and we're going to go straight in with a fresh tier list, which we will then put everything in right at the end. So first up, we have Pestilence. So this is the Ares god power. So this is different to Legacy, where it slows down the building rate of units. So you still can build units, but what it does now is it stops arrows firing from buildings. So if you want to go for some kind of Ares rush with Cyclopses, then you can use it on your enemy towers, and the towers won't shoot you. And obviously, if you use it on the buildings, then they'll get units out slower. So does that make it better than Legacy? Now, I'm really not sure whether this makes it better or not than the Legacy version. It seems that when I've used it, if you try and go for some kind of Ares rush, I feel like one Cyclops isn't enough. So you kind of want to hold it until you've got more. Um, maybe you'd see a bit more success if you do it like that. But for now, I'm going to put Pestilence in C tier. I just feel like there's a lot of better uses of God powers, and if you're on the defensive, then this just isn't useful for you at all. So you've really got to have a game plan in mind. Obviously, you could save it for something like a second gold mine if your opponent puts a fortress or a Migdal stronghold down, and you would use it, especially Migdals, if you were to use it there, which means that the chariots would train slower and the arrows wouldn't shoot. Maybe that's good, but then that's just a bit more situational. Some of these other ones you can use whenever you want, and they're really strong. So I'd say C tier for Pestilence is absolutely fine. It only costs 50 to reuse Pestilence, so maybe plus 10 each time. So maybe it is better than this, but I'll have to do some more testing. But for now, we're CT is fine. Now we have Restoration. Now, Restoration is a very strong god power, but it does cost 80 to reuse, and 80 favor for Greeks, when Greeks have so much more to spend favor on, I think is a little bit much. But if you compare it to bulk costs 65 to reuse, so restoration only being slightly more, which is crazy. Bolt's not good. But we're going to put restoration as A tier. What it does is it heals up your units and kind of makes them invincible. I wouldn't say it's as strong as Legacy unless the numbers are the same, but it doesn't feel as strong. But still, it is something where if you're in an even fight, you're just going to win that fight. Or even if you're slightly behind, then you could probably win that fight anyway, or at least not lose any units, take out some enemy units, and then pull back. So I think A tier is a great spot for restoration. It's just a solid god power. Now, Ceasefire is a strange one. Honestly, I'm surprised that Ceasefire made it in. When I made a tier list before Retold came out about Ceasefire, I was saying that this one would absolutely break the game. Now, Ceasefire can be used in things like Eclipse. It can be used in things like Fimbulwinter, and that makes it less fun. It's basically like the anti-fun god power, but it's a really short cooldown now. It used to be 50 seconds, and now I believe it's 30. So or 25 even. So it's a lot less. But I'm going to put it B tier. So against some things, as I just mentioned, things like Eclipse, like an Ancestor's Eclipse or Fimbulwinter, it's extremely strong. But other times, if you're being attacked and you need to get loads of units out, you've only got 25 seconds worth of time to get units out, whereas before you would have had loads and loads of time. So I'd say it isn't as good in those circumstances, but as a straight counter, it's obviously very strong. You can use it against Shockwave, which obviously shows how broken Shockwave is. Or it is a pretty good counter to Chaos, which we'll get to later. So it's good as a counter, but for its old intended use, probably not great. And also, you won't be able to build a town center up within this time either. You used to be able to throw on like 5 or 6 villagers, be able to build a town center within that time. Now you've got no chance unless you have loads of villagers already around a town center, or it's half finished. Next up, we have Plague of Serpents. Now, Plague of Serpents, if this was release version, so we are like patch number 2 now. If it was release version, they'd straight be S tier. But now they've been nerfed quite a lot. They don't do that much damage to villagers. The C version's been nerfed, but it still denies an area. So if you use it on the water, you're going to have to get some ships out to deal with it. Docks now shoot them, which is obviously very good. But it just denies an area for a set amount of time until you have the units to clear it off, or you can use it on an enemy gold mine. I think I'll just call this one A tier. I think it is still good. It isn't like it's been nerfed to hell. I think the buffing and nerfing so far has been pretty good. I mean, obviously some pantheons are getting ridiculously strong, but overall I think it's been good. They haven't nerfed stuff so that it's unusable, so I'd say it's still A tier. Also, it's just something you can use anywhere, which is something that I didn't say, or which is something that I mentioned with Pestilence. Pestilence you have to use in a specific circumstance, whereas you can just drop Plague of Serpents wherever you want, aggressively, defensively. It's absolutely fine. Next one's Eclipse. Eclipse has actually been nerfed, but I think Eclipse, especially in Retold, is so good. So Eclipse lasts for 50 seconds now. I think it was 55, now it's 50. I don't have it updated here, but I believe it's 50 seconds now. And you get so much value. Your myth units are faster, they have more attack, they have faster recharge on their abilities. If you use it with obviously Sphinx from Bast, Scorpion Men, if you want to save it till later and get Avengers in or Mummies in, it just does so much damage. Obviously with Ancestors, I mean, I don't think I can put this S tier because there's other certain god powers coming up that are S tier. But is it the best classical? Is it the best classical age god power? I think it is. So maybe we are going to have to put it S tier. I think it is. I think it is the best. So if we're judging it against other classical age ones, I think it has to be S tier. The only problem is it isn't something like Restoration where you can use it whenever you want, and it doesn't block god powers anymore. So this is the one drawback of it. But the best thing about it is you want to build myth units in Retold, and Eclipse is just so strong. Also, you get 100% extra favor with it, so you'll be able to make more myth units afterwards as well, or uh, use extra god powers. Now, it does cost 100 to reuse, so that is quite a lot. But I'm sure if you get like double pharaohs out, or priests out, empowering every monument, um, then maybe it's going to be strong. Now we're on to Shifting Sands. Now, Shifting Sands is a strange one because when I made this legacy tier list, it was straight S tier. Shifting Sands was the best. But the reason it isn't now, it's still very strong, but the reason it isn't now is it's been nerfed. It's a lot slower. So your units take about 2 seconds to actually shift, so your opponent can tell when it's coming. So if you're doing like a siege tower shifting sands or scarabs, then it's a little bit weaker there. Obviously, still very strong, but gives your opponent a chance to react. Um, you can't shift enemy units anymore, which is probably the biggest downfall of it, because that's something that you could set up a box. You could get the enemy Greek heroes in it or strong units. You could shift them in, or the enemy termers in a little box that would just be dead. Then you can't do that anymore. You can still use it, obviously, with your own units. Get villagers onto a town center. Get villagers forward to build a migdal on a gold mine, or obviously just shifting out of a bad fight or into a good fight on an enemy gold mine. Like it definitely isn't bad, but it does cost 50 to reuse, which isn't bad at all. Hmm. Am I convincing myself that this is as good as Eclipse? I think it is. I think it is. I think it is. I'm just comparing everything to Shockwave, and Shockwave was broken, but we're doing this as just a classical age one. So I think S tier, Eclipse, Shifting Sands, I think that's solid. Egyptians doing well. I think Shifting Sands has got to be it for the versatility. Eclipse isn't as versatile, so maybe Shifting Sands is still the best. That's crazy. Let me know what you think about that one, because this is interesting, because I was thinking about having it A tier, but I think it is S tier. Now we have Healing Spring. This is one I thought would be absolutely broken for Retold if you could reuse it, but it costs 100 to reuse, so you're not reusing this, especially as Norse. It just costs way too much. Now I'm going to put this as B tier. Now, the reason for this is Healing Spring, obviously your opponent can steal it, but if you have it next to your town center, it's basically like they can never steal it unless they take your town center down. Um, so that is a really good place to have it. But then if you use it like that, then you have it on the defensive, which means you need to sit back there, and it slows a lot of your pushes down. It's obviously really good in a defensive standpoint because you get trolls with it, and your trolls can sit in your healing spring, defend whatever's coming at you, the centaurs, the raids. But it isn't something that you can just use aggressively and not have any drawbacks. If you use it aggressively, and then the enemy destroys your front base, you're just screwed. They now have a healing spring, and that's why it's B tier. If it wasn't to ever change over to your enemies, then I mean it's going to be A or S tier, isn't it? But that's the kind of the drawback of it. Now I've got a forest fire. Forest fire's a strange one. Forest fire was another one I thought would be broken for Retold, being able to reuse it. But again, it costs 125 to reuse. Some of these ones are brutal. And forest fire doesn't seem to do that much damage. And sometimes I feel like it doesn't even burn down the whole forest. It burns down like the smallest section of it. Obviously, because you pair it with the Valkyrie, and the Valkyrie can like somewhat block villagers in, it is good in that circumstance. Or to burn away like the safest wood line. But again, it doesn't burn it away fully sometimes. So I feel like it isn't as strong as it potentially could be. I think if it always burnt down a forest and did decent damage, then obviously I'd move it up. But it just doesn't do much. So C tier, maybe even D tier. No, it isn't. It isn't going to be D tier because of one that's coming up. So we're going to have to put that C tier. Okay, Undermine. Undermine is the Heimdall god power where he uses it on a tower or a town center or fortress and does some damage to it, or on a building that isn't finished yet, and then basically that building is never coming up. So it's obviously paired well with some kind of rush or all in. It works really well with walking woods because you can use undermine and walking woods, and you basically only need a little bit more extra firepower to take down a town center. But I feel like maybe it's a bit more situational. It doesn't always do a lot of damage. Obviously, it takes down a tower fully and then does some extra damage. So I mean, it isn't bad. But then you kind of have to play it as if you're going for an all in. Because if you were to just use it raw on its own, your opponent would have a chance to heal that back up. So I think that's just going to be a uh, B tier one. It's just okay. Next, we've got Spider Layers. So Spider Layers is going straight in the D tier. So Spider Layers, it's very, very cheap. If I was to find it here, where is it? It costs 3 extra each time with a 2-minute cooldown. But there's only 3. Your opponent used to be able to see when this was going down, but now they fixed that, which is good, which bumps it up from D tier to D tier because there isn't a lower one. But it just feels very underwhelming. Obviously, it kills 3 units, which is weird because when I made my other tier list for Legacy, I put this one really, really high up. But I feel like compared to some of the other ones, it just doesn't do a lot. If this was on like a 30-second cooldown or a minute cooldown, maybe, then maybe I could just bump it up a bit. But a 2-minute cooldown, just to kill off 3 units, it's just not great. You compare it to something like a Shockwave from Archaic Age, or if you compare it to something like probably its closest comparison here would be like Plague of Serpents, which is just way better. It's got to be D tier for me. So next up we have Valor. So Valor is the Prometheus god power. I actually think of his name there. This converts one of your units into a hero and also heals it fully. So you can use it in 2 ways. You can obviously use it to just heroize a unit instantly that's already full health. And it also doesn't need to wait those few seconds. It just does it instantly. Or you can wait for something to get really, really low. And then as soon as you use this, it goes back up to full health. So I think it just does 1 unit now, which doesn't feel strong, but it costs 1 favor and then 1 favor extra for each time you use it. And as we've said, Atlanteans get a free early favor because they need to scout with the oracles and nobody can stop them. So they already have like 20 favor going into classical age anyway. So I'm going to put that as A tier just because of the reusability. Obviously, on its own, it's whatever, but because you can use it so much. And what is the cooldown of it? 30-second cooldown, which, yeah, so you can just use it constantly. Now, the last one is Caladria. Caladria is very strange one. So you can use it on an enemy town center that isn't finished, and it will do decent damage to that, especially if you catch it early. That's probably the best use of it. Or what I like to do is put it on the enemy archers, and the enemy archers have to run, and then you get some good DPS from it. I think I've seen a tier list on Reddit where they put this as like D tier, but I really don't think so. I think it's definitely A or B tier. It costs 20 to reuse, so maybe that's not ideal. But then only +5 each time. Um, but I think it's definitely A or B tier. If I compare it to these ones, okay, maybe it's going to have to be B tier. I think it is in its own situation. It is relatively strong, but again, if it's going to be situational, then it's going to have to be B tier, isn't it? But that is the classical age. Let's move on to heroic. Okay, heroic age. So first off, again, we're going in with the Greeks first. So curse. Curse has had a slight nerf. It did 850 value and now down to 800. So resource value of enemy units. But I still think it's S tier. I think curse is just really, really strong. If you're going into even an unfavorable fight if you're just down by a small amount, then you use curse. It's very, very strong. Also, if there's just an enemy raid with like a handful of units, so if there's like 7 or 8 cavalry units, then you just use that. They all become pigs, and you get pigs to transfer back to your town, and you get some good herdable food. I just don't see it being less than S tier unless it's nerfed again. Then maybe it will go down. But The nerfs have been relatively good for Retold so far, so it doesn't make things unusable, but I still think Curse is S tier. Now it's interesting because the Egyptians were very strong for the classical age, but I feel like for heroic age, the Greeks are very, very strong. I'm going to put bronze as S tier. Yeah, I think I am. So Egyptians for the classical age were very strong, and now Greeks for heroic age are very strong. So I'm going to put bronze as S tier. Now, someone watching this from a legacy standpoint might be thinking this is a bit strange. The bronze is so strong now. It gives so much armor, like a ridiculous amount of armor, and it now works on myth units as well, which just makes them so strong. If you come up a if you're in an even fight and you use bronze and your opponent uses flaming weapons, then you win. Whereas Legacy, that wouldn't have happened at all. But I think that makes so much more sense because bronze is a localized area. Like it's a big radius, but it's one area. Flaming weapons affects the whole of the map. So it makes sense that bronze wins. But bronze being this strong is actually pretty crazy. But the only drawback of it is obviously you need a big army to use it, and you need to use it in the right position. You can't just use it anywhere. Because if you use it somewhere and your opponent runs away, then you need something to do with it. So that's maybe the one drawback of it that could pull it back. But I think it's just so strong, it's got to be S tier. Next up is Underworld. So Underworld is you have one Underworld passage one side, one the other side, and you can jump through to it. One thing that makes it better than before is myth unit specials don't reset when you go in there. So if you use a Manticore special, you can use it to jump through the underworld, use it, and then return, take no damage, and you've used that special. Not the same with centaurs or anything. So that makes it slightly stronger. But I'm going to put it as A tier. It's just a really solid god power. You can really sway the match with it. If you use it in the correct way, you can put it on an enemy gold mine, take out loads of gold miners, then just hop back, and your opponent just has to come back or lose all their villagers. Or you can use it, especially if you're Zeus, you get loads of hoplites, put it on an enemy town center, take that town center down, then just run back, or get some villager kills as they lose their town center. Right at the start, we've got some good ones here. So the next one up is Ancestors. Ancestors has got to be an A god power. It's a bit slow now. It takes a few seconds for all the ancestors to spawn in, but you get a free army. You can use this on enemy villagers to take them down, or you can use it with your army just to gain a stronger push. As long as there's not a lot of strong heroes around, Ancestors is just very, very versatile. Again, so strong A tier pick. Citadel Center, you use it on one of your town centers and it becomes a citadel. Gee, how much is this to reuse? Because that would be an interesting. 150 to reuse. 150 favor to reuse. Okay. I was going to say, if it was quite cheap, then maybe it's worth it. But this is a heroic age god power, just feels bad. It feels like Sentinels, but heroic age. So it just makes one of your town center stronger, it just goes straight in the D tier. I mean, not only is it just like a boring technology for a boring god power anyway, it just doesn't feel the strongest. It isn't like it makes your town center basically invulnerable for a while. Like it's just I don't know, just gives it extra defenses. So a little bit boring and not the strongest either. So D tier. And then sticking with it looks like the Egyptians did well for classical, but not right now. Locust for Sobek or Hathor, depending on what portraits you have, is just C tier. So it's even had a buff where now it's wider. So Locust Swarm in Legacy used to be so strong. This would be you would choose an area and it would do loads of damage to villagers, loads of damage to farms. You could just take out loads of farms or loads of gold miners. But now it kind of starts off in an area and then slowly moves like a locust swarm you'd expect it to do, but it just doesn't do much damage unless your opponent walks with the locust swarm. It just doesn't do a lot. Also, now you can use it on enemy units, and it's kind of like when do you use it? Do you use it in a big fight or do you use it on villagers? It's just a bit you don't really know where to use it, and I think it needs some more love rather than just getting a slightly wider circle. Now, we've got Walking Woods. So, Walking Woods was really strong very recently. It was very strong. And then it got nerfed slightly. And I haven't seen as much cheese come from it yet. But what Walking Woods is you use it on an area of trees. Those trees become yours. They become myth units that you can then use. They're very good against buildings and just decent against normal units, but obviously mostly strong against buildings. I think I'm just going to put it A tier. I think there's quite a lot of decent heroic age options. The only drawback of it is, I mean, you want to use it aggressively. Obviously, if you need to use it defensively, you can. It can just be extra like meat shields to kind of soak up some damage if you want to use it defensively. But then it gets rid of your own trees. It's very strong aggressively, so I think it needs to be A tier. It isn't S. Maybe it was S before, but not anymore. So next up is flaming weapons. I can't put flaming weapons as good as bronze because it just isn't. So I think that's A tier as well. It seems like heroic age ones, they're either really good or just awful. I think there is a B tier coming up, but that's fine. So flaming weapons gonna cost 250 to reuse. So as we said earlier, it's gives extra attack to everything on the map for you or every unit on the map. Historically, a very very strong power. Maybe it just feels a bit underwhelming compared to what it used to be. But I think A tier is still very, very strong, obviously, just comparing it to Legacy. So next up is Frost. So Frost, I'm going to put B tier. I think Frost people don't use properly now. So Frost obviously freezes an area of units, and those units can't move for a long time. It's 50 seconds, I think. And how much does this cost to redo? It costs 200 to reuse. So you're never reusing this one unless you don't like fire giants or frost giants or whatever. What used to happen on Legacy is each hit that you would do on a certain unit would take one damage. But now there isn't a minimum damage cap. So you could hit the same unit 5 times and maybe that might do one damage. So it does a lot less damage to it. So you need to kind of use it where you freeze the army that is defending a gold mine or defending a food source or something, and then you then go take out those villagers. That's how you need to use it. I haven't really seen it used much like that, but I think that's the new way to do it. Or you could wall in your enemies or build up a hill fort in an aggressive spot, but it needs to be used slightly differently. But I think in time, maybe this could also go up. Now there's a there's a reason here that these are S tier, but Chaos is just better than both of these. So it needs oh no, that isn't how I do it. So I need to add in an extra S plus tier just for this guy. Because it is Chaos is the strongest god power in the game. So yeah, the list that I'm using is slightly outdated. It said it costs 50. It's been nerfed, so it costs 60 to reuse, but it's ridiculously strong. So rather than a few becoming a Gaia unit, what happens now is it's a small circle, but they all attack each other. Enemy units attack each other for a long time. Especially if you've got something like a counter unit, if it's a Terma, if it's slingers, a Prodromos, anything like that, if they counter each other, they just shred. Or even if you use it on enemy siege that's next to a building, it will attack the building and absolutely shred it. It's crazy. It's easily the best god power in the whole game, and I don't know how they're going to nerf it cost wise. I think they'll just have to nerf the time that chaos is on for or something. Maybe that's a harder thing to change, but that's what I would do because right now it lasts a lot longer than you'd think, and maybe you just need to shave a second off of that, and it'd be fine. But for now, it's S plus. Oh, that one's S. Yeah, there we go. S plus tier for sure. Now, next up is Traitor. So Traitor is the rear god power. So this is where you steal an enemy unit, and with everything else is so strong now, so powerful. So I feel like something like Traitor just isn't now. It costs 15 to reuse, which is the same as Shockwave. But would you rather have a Shockwave than a Traitor? Probably. You probably get more value from it. So I think Traitor is better than Citadel. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's almost like a better Bolt, isn't it? Which is a bit strange. But Bolt is Archaic Age, or yeah, it's just really, really strange one. It's got to be C or D tier. Maybe it doesn't fit my curve as nicely, but I think it's got to be D tier. It's just not good at all. I don't know how you'd even buff it. It's just not a good god power compared to the others, unless you made it like it's an 180-second cooldown, 3 minutes to reuse something where you just take a unit. And obviously, if you take a really strong unit, it's good, but it's very limited time where you're going to get that value where like your opponent just has one fire giant or something like that you're going to steal, or one siege unit that you want to take. Yes, yeah, they're more than likely going to have a couple, which will just yeah. I mean, then it's like 2 bolts, I guess, but very strange. Last one is Hesperid's Tree. So Hesperid's Tree has had a buff where you now get Dryads spawning for free when you drop it down. So I think that has made it better. It no longer blocks enemy god powers now, which obviously doesn't make it as good. But I think I'm gonna put it B tier. Just being able to get Dryads, like Dryads are just decent units that are relatively cheap for how strong they are. And now that you gain 2 for free, I'm just gonna put it B tier. I think there's no way that it's better than something like flaming weapons or whatever, but I think it's way better than these guys down here. It's just an okay god power, so I think B tier is fine for the okay god powers. Now, finally, we have Mythic Age god powers. It's so hard to judge these because if you were to compare them to anything else, they are just ridiculously strong. But obviously, we've got to decide which ones go where. I think I'm going to kind of group them together rather than talking about them individually because there's certain ones like Earthquake, Lightning Storm, Meteor, Tornado, and Implode that actually, we're missing one. I just realized we're missing Fray god powers, so we'll put those in right at the end. That's interesting that I completely forgot about those, but we'll add those in right at the end because it isn't on this list. So we're going to talk about these first. So so which one's the strongest out of these? Earthquake does a lot of damage to buildings. Lightning Storm does damage to units and buildings. So does Implode. Tornado seems like the weakest of all of them, but it does a lot of damage to units. So what's different about these than in Legacy is there's no damage cap now. So Earthquake would do an obscene amount of damage and then it would hit the cap and that would be it. It wouldn't do any more. But now there isn't. And I think that using this plus tier as well, Meteor right now is S plus tier. I believe it's got a nerf coming, judging by the test patch. There's now a test patch for when I'm recording this where they've nerfed certain things. So Meteor would take an extra hit to take down a town center. But currently it's S plus tier. I play a lot of ISIS. You go through Thoth. You can use it on enemy buildings. You can use it on enemy units. It just destroys anything. And I definitely think it's the best version of these. If you, I think it's very similar to something like Lightning Storm, but the difference with Lightning Storm is when you first use it, it doesn't do much. But then the longer that the units are in that area, it starts to build up the damage, and the last few seconds it does a crazy amount. Whereas every meteor does the same amount. So if your opponent runs out of it within 5 seconds, you've still got the first 5 seconds that did ridiculous damage. Whereas if you did that with Lightning Storm, it isn't the same. So I think that has to be marked down for that. Then Earthquake and Implode, they're very similar. Implode does a lot of damage to units, but you need to have a really specific place to use them. And it does a lot of damage to units and not so much to the buildings. It's like it tries to do everything but doesn't quite do it. But obviously it can sway a game completely. The thing is, can we mark something like Tornado C tier? I don't think we can. I think the ones that do a lot of damage to units and buildings need to be higher than the rest of them. But I think I would do something like this. So Meteor is easily the best. Earthquake and Implode do a lot of damage. They're good. Something like Tornado and Lightning Storm, you can run away from and not be in as bad of a position. Whereas these ones, as I said, Implode you can't run away from, which is why it's going to be pretty good because it slurps you back in. There's no chance. But I think this is a good way to have them. But a destructive god power, I can't imagine it being below A tier unless it's something like Tartarian Gate. So Tartarian Gate right now just doesn't seem that strong. It seems like you can take it down relatively easily. It just seems like it doesn't deny enough of an area or do as much damage as it should. So I think it could be B or even C tier. I think it's quite weak. I think maybe even C tier. Is it probably the worst? I think it's probably the worst Mythic Age god power right now. I don't think any deserve to be in the D tier. I think that's a bit harsh. How much is it to reuse this guy as well? 350. Okay. There's no way that it's on the same level as Son of Osiris or Meteor or anything. All of the big ones are 350. Now we've got something like Plentyvolt. And Plentyvolt is just a straight A tier for me. It gives you 3 of every resource per second going forward. So when you start to run out of gold mines or things like that, then it's just always there. and it costs 200 to reuse, I believe. 200, yeah. So if you want to, you can get more and more of these, and it isn't so much of a big cost because it's kind of essentially paying for itself, isn't it? It's giving you extra resources. Um, but it just doesn't have that big swaying moment of something like an earthquake or a lightning storm. So you've got to really think about it, whether you want to go through Hera and get that big lightning storm or Artemis and get that big earthquake, or if you're just going to play the long, slow game. And I prefer the finishing the game off rather than the slow game because my slow game's terrible. So next up, Son of Osiris, probably my favorite character in the whole game, my favorite unit. Probably a lot of people's as well. He's just a cool guy, obviously with his chain lightning ability. Does a lot of damage. I think he's just going to have to be straight S tier. It's certain matchups, obviously, are a bit of a struggle for Son of Osiris. Like if you're going against Egyptians with their chariot archers, which are faster than him and have more range, they can always take him down. Him against myth units, he's just so strong. Myth units are obviously very prevalent right now with Retold and how good myth units are. So it just makes Son of Osiris better. And he has divine damage now, which is really strong. It costs 350 to reuse. I mean, you're probably never getting a second one. But he also empowers stronger than a pharaoh, which is a pretty cool ability to have. And I like that when you use Son of Osiris, you pretty much get the next pharaoh straight away. Or maybe it does take a minute. But anyway, you get more pharaohs as well, and that just makes Son of Osiris strong in my opinion. I think he's a S tier. You don't really see him as much right now because Meteor is just very strong. So ISIS players are going to go for Thoth with Meteor and Valley of the Kings, but I think Son of Osiris is very good. Ah, Ragnarok. Ragnarok is just. I'm surprised Ragnarok made it back in the game, to be honest. It's very surprising. I don't like to play against it. I don't think many people like to play against it. Is it weaker now that instead of 120 villages, you now get 100? Maybe that's not as strong, but I mean, you're never going to use it at max villages anyway. It's very rare that you're going to get a game like that. But I think it has to be S tier. I hate to say it, I just really don't like Ragnarok, but it has to be S tier. And I'm also going to drop down Plenty Vault to B tier. I think I prefer to have these big abilities rather than the slow game. But maybe for someone that's macro heavy, maybe they're going to have it as S tier. Not sure, but for me, these big swaying moments are going to be a bit better than Plenty Vault. So next up is Nidhogg. Now I play a lot of Egyptians, so against me Nidhogg's awful because you have the divine damage priests, Pharaoh or Son of Osiris. There's absolutely shreds the Nidhogg. He has that cool ability now, which I don't think people use properly because they have it on auto cast. But it can really get him out of dangerous situations or do a lot of damage to a certain area. But I feel like right now he's got to be a B tier uh, a B tier god power. There's no way he's as good as Son of Osiris. He's not as safe. He's quite slow. But I think with the ability, I think if you can like min max that ability and use it, micro it a lot, then maybe it goes up. But just how it's used from what I've seen, it's got to be B tier. Fimbulwinter, very strong. I'm going to put it A tier. In your team games, it goes straight up to S plus tier because it just does an insane amount of damage. But in a 1v1, I would put it as A tier just to just note that, yeah, it would go up in a team game. But how it works is the Fimbulwinter wolves spawn around your enemy town center. You can't control them, but they do a shed load of damage. Um, and yeah, just and it lasts quite a long time now. It's like 30 something seconds. So it's pretty good. I think how much does it cost to redo? 350. Yeah, so you're not going to be redoing it ever really, but yeah, there's a lot of damage, so we like that. Then last up, I'm just going to put A tier again, which is Vortex. So Vortex is it costs plus 25 each time, but the first two are free. So from Legacy, there was three charges, but now you get two for free, and then it costs plus 25 each time. So it's very similar to a Shifting Sands, but you can use it on a 2-minute cooldown, and it's very cheap, especially for Atlanteans that can get quite a lot of favor income with all their oracles. So I think A tier is fine for this one. I think it's just a solid one. It's not absolutely broken like some of these S tier ones, but I think that's good. So I'm going to put these together. into one tier list, and then we're going to add in some of the Fray god powers because I completely forgot about those. Okay, so we've got the Fray god powers now. So I'm going to put these in. So Gull and Bursty is an extremely strong Archaic Age god power. It costs so much to reuse that you're basically never reusing it. But I still think that this is an S tier. It's probably one of the best Archaic Age god powers there is. Is it probably comparable to a Shockwave? I'd say yes, because you can obviously, I mean, the later on you use it, the stronger it is. If you can force this out of a Fray player, then you have a so much better chance of beating him later on. What my favorite thing about it is if you use it on an army, sort of acts like a mini meteor or mini shockwave where it hits everything away and does damage to them, which is really cool. And I think it's just a great god power there. The next one is Asgardian Bastion. So Asgardian Bastion lets you get a fortress in the classical age, which in itself is an S tier. But the thing is, it costs it takes so long to build in the classical age. One of the techs also makes it quite cheap. It makes it 40 favor instead of 100 to reuse. So I think later on in the game it's really strong. But early, I'm going to put it as a B tier pick. Unfortunately, it's not going to make a new row because I've just got this in Photoshop. Um, but I'd say it's B tier. It's just okay in certain situations to get gold mines and stuff. It's really good. But if you use it and your enemy is anywhere near you in the classical age, then they have a really good chance of taking it down. I'm also going to put Tempest as B tier. I don't think Tempest is the strongest of the heroic age god powers. So this one slows you down, and then if you stay within that area, it freezes you. Very similar to a frost, but doesn't give you all of the extra armor. If you know it's coming, as soon as they hit the heroic age, they normally use it if you're fighting. They want to bait you into a fight. You can, as soon as you see that, you can just get out. You have quite a long time to actually get out and only lose a few units to it. And I think for that reason, I'm going to put it as B tier. And then Inferno. Inferno is the giant Fenrir wolf that comes at you in fire and then explodes. And there's no way that that isn't at least A tier, maybe even S tier. Is it better than Lightning Storm or Tornado? I think it's probably similar to Lightning Storm and Tornado. It does very good damage to units and buildings, but doesn't destroy It doesn't destroy full bases like Earthquake does. It doesn't destroy a lot of units like something like Meteor does. So I think A tier is really good for this. Anyway, that's my tier list. It's probably a pretty long one, but if you disagree with anything, let me know. I think the curve is better than the last one, but you can be the judge of that. And I'll see you in the next one.